This go around, we're going to talk about a really interesting aspect of CEDIA integration. We're going to talk about MDUs, multiple dwelling unit design, and the challenges that are involved in integrating these specific projects. We are joined by Eddie Shapiro of SmartTouchUSA. Hi, Eddie. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Ed?
I'm great. And Chris Knight from Perfect Integration.
Great,
how are you, Chris?
I'm good.
My name's Ed Wenck. This is Walt Zerbe, my co-host on the CEDIA podcast every week. How many of these projects have you tackled?
I think we're on 6 or 7 now.
Oh, okay.
So
this
yeah.
is a regular thing for
Regular
you.
thing, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Eddie, how many have you done?
So just about 2 with a couple smaller iterations of that.
Okay.
Along
All
the way.
right. So how did you get the jobs? I mean, where do you find these particular leads? That's
Yeah, and did you transition into multi-dwelling unit, or what did you do before that?
Well, we picked up our first one, I think, when the company was only 2 years old. And it was just through contacts. We're based in central London, and both of the schemes that we started working on back then were central London-based schemes, just through some architects that we've worked with. And then that first project that we did, that then led to all the others, because it's obviously a fantastic showcase. And I think once your company's known for delivering high-quality projects, we actually won a CEDIA award for the first one that we did. Wow. For the best MDU.
Yeah.
And the second one we did, I think, was a highly commended. And then the third one, which I think is the thing that you've got a photo of there, that also won an award for best MDU. So I think once you've delivered a couple of award-winning projects, you get known for it, and ever since then, it's been a fairly steady stream of work.
That's terrific. And Eddie, how did you get that job in the Baltimore Harbor that you had?
So we got that project because MDUs are commercial spaces.
Yeah.
So what happens is they bring in commercial people. So this was a project that really required a residential feel, and so they brought us in because that's what we do. We do residential, high-end luxury residential.
Gotcha. Are these retrofits? Are these new builds?
No,
what were you involved in?
there's not much new build goes on in London, but the one that one of these was a new build. The other 2 were sort of major renovations. So although the shell of the building was old and original,
right.
The interiors were completely remodeled. So we were fortunate enough to be involved early enough to do the full design as part of the design team. So all the electrical design and everything else we took care of.
I know that for your project that won the CEDIA award for MDUs last year, you had taken over from a commercial integrator or somebody else who hadn't done such a great job for the building manager, right?
Well, before the project got started, so it was a hotel.
Oh,
so
okay.
the hotel had X number of floors, and they actually added 8 or 9 more floors on top of the hotel to create residences.
Mm-hmm.
So as they were developing the models, they weren't happy with the models. So that's when we started. So before construction, we were actually in there, except for the fact that the steel structure was up and the floors were starting to go. So it was not a retrofit for us. It was steel, concrete, glass, no glass,
Wild.
open floors.
So you're saying that there was a commercial integrator involved, but their vision wasn't suitable for the developer, and they said we think we might need somebody that has more of a residential vision.
Right. So you had this beautiful living room with a curved flat screen, visible 3 speakers above the flat screen that were just awful. They had a bank of 12 buttons for switches for lighting.
Aye.
I mean, it was cluttered, So it had to get more elegant and quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Now, you've got to deal with a building manager on
Yes,
these projects,
absolutely.
right?
Yes.
Any extra challenges there? Or?
But normally on an MDU scheme, it's just a bigger team that you're dealing with. So there's more people, there's architects, interior designers, M&E consultants. So we just form part of that design team, and it's just about collaboration. And some projects run more smoothly than others if the team is more cohesive.
Wasn't one of your projects like a short-term high-end rental?
Yes, so one of the ones originally that was designed to be for the resale market, but the building owner changed tactic halfway through and then turned it into a high-end rental.
So that's an interesting twist on custom, because you have to design a system that's going to be flexible enough, an integration that's going to be flexible enough to meet the needs of any luxury client who happens to be in there. How do you address that challenge?
I think it's just about planning for every possibility. You've got to put yourself in the situation of somebody who's going to be renting an apartment paying £20,000 a month to stay in this apartment. That kind of high net worth individual is going to have very specific requirements, and we found that across the 16 apartments within that scheme, every single client was different. And
Right.
some people have actually been there for 5 or 6 years since we did it on a rental basis. But that same building has got Airbnb in there as well, so you could get an Airbnb in a fully integrated apartment. So obviously making sure that it's easy to use and intuitive. You're not going to be there to do a handover to the someone that's staying there. It just needs to be easy to use and function reliably.
Yeah.
So when you did these jobs, was there a baseline and then you allowed for some level of customizing, or how's that work when you work with the developers in each one of these spaces?
So for
This
us,
is for both of you.
So for us, we took 8 floors of residences, made them all the same. So they all had electronic locks, thermostats, lighting control, and electronic shades.
Right.
And we wired for a few other extras that may happen later, like speakers and TVs. So every one of them was identical, but then we had options for when someone bought their unit. So these were condominiums, these were not rentals.
Right.
So when they came in, they could buy speakers, they could buy more integration for locks, for example, like we could give them a lot more to the lock screens, flat screens. We had some people build out with multiple flat screens and do some really cool things. Other people just take it as it is.
You also had to integrate several common areas in the
Right.
project that you worked on too. Talk about that a little bit and tell me what the challenges were there.
So we took the amenities floor and took care of the pool area, the exercise
Yep.
area, and of course everything ended up with lighting control and electronic shades, multi-zone music, flat screens. So, and some of those are password protected. So so when you go up to the touch display, not anybody can just touch it. And we've done that with a number of other amenity floors where we didn't do the whole space, we just did the floor. And so it's a nice process.
Well,
We talk a lot about the glue, which is networking in the backbone. Did you guys take care of the network for the entire building too? I mean, you've got your common spaces, you have your individual spaces. How did you manage all the Wi-Fi access points and all the, did you
Absolutely.
do the,
We
talk
did the
about that,
network.
because that could,
There's a scheme we're working on at the moment that we originally took over from another integrator that wasn't doing a great job for the client in the first instance. And this scheme is being delivered in phases. So the first phase was sort of 16 apartments. We've just completed the next phase of 9. A further phase of 8 apartments is under construction. And this is across a sort of a crescent in central London. We've actually got a fibre network throughout the entire building. And in that case, we're actually acting as an ISP as well. So we brought in a gigabit lease line. We have that set up so that when people move in, their internet's live on day one.
Wow.
And then they get effectively a week's worth of free internet, and then they get to choose a package or whatever. Not everybody has taken up that. Some people just want to go with their existing supplier, but all of the people in the current phase have gone with that approach. We deliver that same network to the landlord. And a really interesting slant on there now with regard to communal areas. The latest phase that's been finished is going to have a residence lounge and cinema area in the basement. And we're designing a system at the moment whereby the users of that space will be able to access their content from their apartments through the network. So if they've got their own Kaleidoscope or media server, satellite boxes, they're going to be able to access that content in the residence cinema through the network.
okay.
So
Wow.
it's quite
So
interesting.
where do the racks live in these projects generally? Do you have one per unit? Do you have some kind of centralized location running a lot of stuff, Eddie? And
Well-
are they situated in a manner where you can get to them without knocking on the door?
Well, no. So in the amenity spaces and in the spas and the presidential suites, all that stuff runs to their own separate little small areas.
Right.
But in the residential condominiums, like the 55 of them that were on top of the hotel, they each have their own little rack. And to the networking issue, yesterday we joked about power is king on the podcast.
Right.
Networking is really king. And the problem with us in that particular one is we did not get to do anything with the network, no Wi-Fi, none of that. It was not part of the developer's component. He didn't want it. So
Wow.
that causes issue for us because,
Sure.
well, the obvious issue is we all try to have remote services. So when someone says, I want to tweak my lighting or I want to, have my shades do X, we can't do anything but roll a truck. So
Right.
network is king.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about that. So do you almost need to station someone to take care of a building? So like, let's say you've got a lot of common components, you need to do firmware updates for a couple hundred devices. How are you handling the service end of this as far as continuing to maintenance an entire building.
I mean,
like
on all of the schemes that we've delivered so far, we have an ongoing maintenance contract in place. We're fortunate enough that all of them, with the exception of one, are within a sort of a 5 to 10 minute walk of our office. Our office is positioned where it is for a reason. So in terms of sort of, we don't need to roll a truck in central London. That would take you hours to get anywhere. So most of them we can deliver, but the remote support is an absolutely key element, because again, most of the people renting these apartments or buying an apartment don't want an engineer coming into their apartment unless you have to. Many of them are second or third homes or holiday homes, and the people just need to know that it's going to work when they come in. So I think remote support is a really important thing. We use devices that monitor the network, etc. It's never fail-safe, but it's that, I think that element of it from the building owner and the building manager perspective is arguably the most important. They just want a very easy life. They don't want the hassle. They don't want customers.
So let me
having an
ask.
excuse.
So Eddie, in your case, where you didn't have a holistic network, how did you solve doing your remote access for all these independent?
Well, you can only so it's an interesting thing, because when it's a condo, you have to wait for people to buy a unit. So I would say that in this particular structure, at least 75% of the units are still not purchased, and it's been about 2 years. So that means that at one point, talking about service, we were in the building every day, in that building, and so we looked like rock stars because we had a technician there every day, because we were building and working on the 12th floor, the 14th floor, whatever floor it was. We always had somebody there. Now it's a ghost town. There's nobody there. We have no reason to be there, and they want the same level of service.
Right.
And there aren't enough units sold to be able to put somebody there and keep us busy full time every day.
Right.
So
and
it's
to that point, now you've got a situation with an MDU where you're not necessarily dealing with the individual who's living in there, you're dealing with the building manager, which I would imagine there's an upside to that, because the building manager is going to get the call on Super Bowl Sunday when something's not working, as opposed to you. But still, there might be some challenges there with a third party involved in all this, correct?
No, I think so, and I think one of the challenges we've found is that the level of service, the level of property that we do, the owners of those buildings or the tenants of those buildings have got very high expectations, and rightly so. They paid a lot of money to either rent or buy these apartments, and the building management is almost like a concierge service. So they don't like getting phone calls from people with issues. So we just need to respond very, very quickly. And I think it's a relationship thing. If you're dealing with a building manager, you need to know that they've got confidence in you. And if you're dealing with private individuals, again, it's just about managing that relationship and keeping people happy.
Surveillance and security, did you have to integrate both individual solutions and building-wide solutions? How did that work?
We tried to do that, but in this particular case, they didn't want it. So I wanted to put touch displays in the spaces that actually incorporated cameras. So that would have been one of their screens. So they have lock screens, but they don't have camera screens.
Okay.
But that may be because, these are camera feeds for lobbies, hallways. I would imagine if the individuals want it, we could do that, but so far nobody wants it.
Okay.
I think that's where having control of the network becomes essential. One of the schemes that just popped up a minute ago, we did the full security in there, that particular apartment there. On this one, each apartment is a whole floor lateral. So the lift from the lobby opens directly into your apartment. So we're controlling, you have a fob entry system to get in the building, a fob entry to get into the lift. The lift opens straight into your apartment. If you have a visitor come to the door, they press a button, pops up on the touch screen. At that moment, you then have access to the camera inside the lobby and inside the lift car, because you need to know that whoever's in the lift coming into your apartment is who you think they are.
Yeah.
So we do that by, again, just controlling the network. And if you've not got control of the network, you couldn't offer that level of integration.
Absolutely.
A lot of lighting and shading issues to deal with there? Integrations?
Lighting and shading's been great.
Oh, awesome.
It's my favorite category in AV. It's the thing that end users relate to the most. It's the thing they touch every day the most. They enjoy it the most.
And what were the solutions that you used in this high-rise in Baltimore?
Restaurant.
Okay, terrific. And you, sir?
Yeah, again, I think we've done lighting in all of the schemes, lighting and shading control. We used Lutron in these particular projects. The scheme we're finishing at the moment, the developer themselves is putting automated shades in all of the apartments that they're dressing for sale. In the other one, it was pre-wire only, and then it was a sort of a tenant option to fit. We found that on the apartments that are resale, almost all the buyers have then gone ahead and purchased automated shading solutions. On the rentals, if you're renting an apartment, you're unlikely to spend that kind of money. Right. So it's quite different when they're for resale rather than rental.
Absolutely.
Any challenges working with the other trades? So when you talk about lighting, you've got what we call high voltage, even though it's not really high voltage. But was that difficult or challenging at all to have things located exactly where you wanted them, and the coordination of, okay, the cans are up and now I can come in and I can program things?
Well, there are a lot of parties, a lot of stakeholders, and so to expand on that, I mean, you're dealing with, the builder, the GC, the developer, the MEP engineering group, the architect, and 20 other people. So there's always, everything's done by committee. So we spent 3 months waiting to start because they had to redo all the engineering for the HVAC to then be able to fit all the other enclosures into the space. But it wasn't because of that, it was because the HVAC wasn't powerful enough for the space. So there are lots of people and lots of things to consider, and it's a huge effort compared to residential single-family home. Mm-hmm. Much different animal.
All right. Distributed audio and video, and also I want to talk about, I know that one of your projects included some kind of dedicated home cinema, right?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Well, it is the project working on the moment. It's not been completed yet, so that's something that we're working on.
All right. Now, how do you make that repeatable?
Well, we'd like to do more dedicated home theatres. Obviously, in London, one of the big issues is space, so many of these MDU schemes just physically don't have the space for that kind of thing. But this particular one that we're working on now, because they've got a double basement underneath it, is going in a sub-basement, and it's obviously space they couldn't use for much else. Mm-hmm.
So I'd imagine distributed audio and video is the way to go in a lot of these.
Absolutely. I mean, and what we found is that the audio, that a lot of the developers, if they're doing these things for resale or rental, they will put the speakers in because they're quite happy to put things in that are difficult to retrofit or messy to retrofit. Mm-hmm. So we've done a lot of the plaster over invisible speakers from Sonance and Amina, because again, the type of property, that kind of thing, suitable. So they put the speakers in, cable it back to a patch panel, but very few of them fit televisions, fit amplifiers, because that's then quite a personal choice as to how many zones of audio, if indeed you want audio. And we've had people who've had TVs fitted in every room. We've got another client that doesn't have a single television in the apartment, but has music working everywhere. So,
did you guys have to have any discussions about sound isolation? So when you put a speaker in the ceiling or speaker in the wall, and you can't bother the adjacent things, did you have to have discussions with the builders about, we could have this problem and we need your help to mitigate this? How did you handle all the back wave stuff?
Great question.
For us, the buildings are fully concrete and in between units. So there hasn't been a lot of speakers except for people who have purchased. And so they get speakers, but it doesn't spread across units. Okay. So it's pretty good. We're careful with that.
Okay.
Yeah, the first scheme that we did was an old Victorian building, so it was a timber construction, and that was a big concern, the audio transmission between. So we did some testing during the construction phases, had an acoustic engineer in a sort of adjoining apartments, because they were quite high-end ones. They had a 5.1 surround system fitted at day one, so we obviously had subwoofers built into the joinery, but that was on a wall that then backed onto the adjoining apartment. So it was just something that we needed to test and make sure. And thankfully, it worked well.
Eddie's done one of these, which won him an award out of the gate. You've done several of these, but think back to when you did your first. Were you winging it, or were you looking at hospitality solutions? I mean, where did you get some of the ideas and some of the training and concepts?
You obviously weren't winging it, but yes.
I know, I smile when he says
It's a fair and honest answer.
No, I mean, our company was still relatively new. We'd worked on some big projects before, but it was, I think, the scale of the project and being able to gear up your engineering team to deliver so many units and obviously they don't all happen at once, but you're still. That was the biggest challenge, I think, is again just coordinating the delivery of the project. In terms of ideas, I think in all those cases we had a good idea, and the client was quite happy to be led by us as to what technology should be going in there. I think even a lot of the experienced developers, they looked at companies like ourselves and other CEDIA members for advice, and yeah.
Sure. Eddie?
And I think you kind of look at an MDU like you look at tract homes, a bunch of single-family homes, the builders running through the street, going down, getting them all done almost at once, and you're trying to keep up. I actually think MDU is a little bit different. I mean, you're doing it by floor, by floor, by floor, by floor. Yeah. And although We haven't done more than 2 of these. We've done a lot of city residential condos that are big penthouses.
Yeah.
So you get to learn the flavor of the building, who you have to talk to. You begin to learn the processes. But a lot of it was easier than I thought, and a lot of it was harder than I thought.
Oh.
And the harder part was dealing with all the consultants. The easier part was actually getting the work done. So
Fair enough. Has any of what you've learned on these projects informed your single-family residence?
actually, I think it's the other way around.
Oh, okay.
So if you
I agree.
are really good with luxury residential spaces,
Got it.
then you can bring that into what is really a commercial livable space, which becomes a condo.
All right.
Were there any unique requirements for documentation and things that you needed to hand over to the property managers or the buildings that were maybe different or extensive
Quite
to
extensive.
what you used to do?
So I gave you the dollar figure the other day. The dollar figure was quite high to produce drawings for all 55 units, and a lot of that happened actually before we were awarded the project. So it was actually kind of a risk in some regards.
So you were investing that money up front.
Yes, yes. And it was yeah, that's kind of crazy.
It's a risk.
Yeah, it was a risk, you're right. But it paid off, and it was a great project, well documented.
Has there been any inspiration to perhaps get into the hospitality biz, to perhaps maybe take on some commercial projects that might involve high-end hotels or something like that?
Well, we like that part. I mean, this was a high-end hotel, so we ended up doing the conference rooms and the spa and the presidential suites and all these different areas.
I'd
so-
forgotten there was condos and hotel rooms.
Right. So we're sort of in that space. We did some work for the restaurant as well. I like that space. I would definitely do more in a heartbeat.
Interesting. You?
Yep. I mean, the MDUs that we did were probably slightly smaller schemes. The largest one was 16 units, and I think most hotels are generally quite a bit bigger. I think we're quite happy sticking with what we would describe as a boutique MDU rather than the big towers. There's other companies in the UK that specialise in
I'd go there.
the multi-hundred unit schemes, and that's not what my business is about. We'd rather bring that high-end residential touch to an MDU rather than go for something more commercial. So that's not what we're trying to focus on at the moment.
What's the big takeaway from this that we haven't mentioned yet, do you think?
I think don't be afraid of getting involved with these. I think a lot of companies, I know from people I've spoken to, often say, I don't think I'd want to take that on. And I think it's an exciting opportunity. And I think if you've been doing high-end single residences, there's no reason you can't get involved in MDU.
Eddie, your big takeaway?
I kind of agree. I think the biggest part is to think residentially, think big, but think very elegantly for a space that everybody else is trying to make very commercial, and turn it into a very nice, warm, high-end residential space.
All right.
I
Well,
have a future question for you. How do you see this going in the future? So one of Ed's favorite words, but do you think energy management, energy control, you guys are going to at some point probably have to be worried because you're going to be in the middle of making sure you can manage that stuff? How do you see things going as you
Funnily
continue
enough,
to
the
progress?
scheme that we've just finished now, we are doing energy monitoring in that scheme. It has centralised plant for heating and cooling. We are using a system that monitors that, and the landlord is actually going to be billing using the system that we've supplied. So it's something that we're going to have some experience of. That scheme's only just completed now, so how that's going to go in terms of management, I don't know yet. But yeah, watch this space.
Eddie?
I think that's impressive. I kind of feel like we're in the middle of it now, not to that degree where we're controlling the spaces,
Yep.
but the building has a much larger, they have engineers and people that control those spaces typically. So we're sort of in the middle on and it's kind of not a good space, I think, to be in. So either going that direction or not being in it at all may be part of that, but somehow having some layer of control.
Last question. We've had a lot of discussions on how media management is getting so messy. You've got the apps, you've got satellite, you've got, it depends on what your market is. Do you think that you'll need to end up offering a technology concierge service for these buildings and for these hotels to help them manage their media, help people deal with how they interact with shows, things disappear, new things show up? Do you think you'll be moving into a service RMR type industry with that at some point?
I don't think I will. I think I'll help curate it as a company, but I don't. There are much bigger players that do that, so I don't think I would.
Okay.
And I think I agree. I think there is potential there, but it's not something that the sort of schemes we're working on. I don't think the buyers of those are probably going to be looking for that kind of service anytime soon.
Chris Knight, Perfect Integration, Eddie Shapiro, Smart Touch USA. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Round of applause for the fellows for
Thank you.
taking the time. Appreciate it immensely. CEDIA.net for more information on us. Thanks.
Thank you.